So my lord came to the palace, after he had called together me, Nuzadak the interpreter, Kushtai, initial D, and Abzakia the Persian. The king was at his dinner table and had not yet finished his meal. The courtiers entered and said, Mani has come and is standing at the door. The king sent the lord this message, Wait a while till I can myself come to you. The lord again sat down to one side of the guard until the king should have finished his meal, when he was to go out hunting. The king rose from the table, and, putting one arm around the queen of the Sakas and the other round Kurder, i.e. Cardil, the son of Ardawan, he came towards the Lord. His first words to the Lord were, You are not welcome. The Lord replied, What wrong have I done? The king said, I have sworn not to let you come to this country. M3. The Coptic story takes up the tale here. Thereon did my lord greet the king respectfully, even while his manner was unfriendly despite the greeting. Indeed, the king answered, full of anger against him, I swore to you by my salvation and my soul, and the soul of my father, and of all who have entered paradise and live, that if you came here and walked on the BA, I would put you to death. MH45. And in anger he spoke thus to the Lord. What are you good for, seeing you go neither fighting nor hunting? But perhaps you are needing for this doctoring and physicking, and you don't even do that. Manuscript 5. The Lord thus replied, I have not done you any harm. I have always done good to you and your family. Many and numerous were your servants whom I have freed of demons and witches. Many were those who were at the point of death, and I have restored them. Manuscript 3. Then the king called to officers to lead my lord into the palace hall. There, when he had gone into the king's presence, he met him face to face. As soon as the king saw him, he twisted his face into an angry laugh. He spoke to him the crowd of his words. See, for the 3 full years you have been going with Badia, i.e. Bat, which is the law that you have taught him, that he has left ours and adopted yours when you have led him to the lecture hall. Why have you not at least gone with him where I told you to go, and come with him? MH46. As soon as my lord knew that the matter for some pretext against him had to be furnished, so that the king might put him to death, my lord spoke openly in front of him, saying, Give to me a chance some other day to talk of these things before the kings and the nobles. I shall not explain anything today when sorrow is afflicting us all. MH46. Then praise came to my lord from all the nobles who were there in his presence, for on that day the king was full of grief over his sister, the mistress of the robes, who had died at that time. The king spoke, saying, It is I who have the choice of the time when you will answer me. All the nobles are now here with us, so you shall speak before me now. MH46. Then in a mighty voice he wrathfully said to him, Who bade thee do these things, or who art thou? Who does deeds that harm all men? MP15. Who has sent thee? For whom are thy preachings? MH93. From whom hast thou learned thine assertion? Our affairs are more important than the world's. For since the beginning, when the Parthians came to the mastery, these affairs of thine have never prospered, nor shall they so long as the mastery is in our hands. MH47. This definitely seems to show that in his mind, Bahram identified Mani with the interests of the fallen Parthian dynasty. The glorious mind answered and said to him direct, MP16. Know, O king, that I am the servant of the God of light, who has sent me in order to choose the church out of a world which has fallen into so many sins. MH93. It is God who has sent me to call thee, thou being a man, to the law of life, and to teach thee the perfect commandments of Christ. MP16. Thereon spoke my lord to him in the presence of all the nobles. Ask all the men about me. I have no human master and teacher from whom I have learned this wisdom, whence I got these things. But when I received them from God through his angel. Cf 8. From God was sent to me a message that I should preach this in your kingdom, for this whole world had wandered into error and got into a bypath. It was willfully fallen away from the wisdom of God, the Lord of all. But I have received it from him, and revealed the way of the truth in the midst of the whole world, so that the souls of this multitude might be saved and escape from the punishment. Cf. GPM 88:1. For the proof of everything I bring is obvious. All that I teach existed even in the first generations, but it is the custom that the way of truth is now and then revealed, and now and then conceals itself again. MH 47. This frank and unanswerable reply enraged King Bahram. He parted his lips. He cried out in a fury, "How comes it that God reveals this to you, while the same God has not revealed it also to us, even though we are still the lords of the whole land?" MH 47. Thou art a vile foreigner. Thou art also a poor man lacking everything. Thou art a man of insignificance, unfit for God to give this unutterable favor and gift. MP 16. My Lord said, MH 47, "Those who are of God do not seek after gold and the world's possessions." MP 16. It is God who has the power to reveal his truth to the one he chooses out of the crowd of all his creatures. MH 47. It is God who commands, and there is no other commandment but his. It is God who teaches whom he will, and gives to him the gift that surpasses all gifts, as a seal that he is a prophet, the true man of God in his deeds and his words. MP 16. He may choose one who has no might, but who are we to ask him, saying, "Strong king, why dost thou not reveal truth to the mighty?" He reveals it to me and not to thee. It is not fitting for thee to ask him angrily, saying, "He has not appeared, let him appear to me." MH 47. This dignified reply, so worthy of the prophet confronted with an infidel tyrant, did not of course help Mani with the king. Then the king said to my lord, "Be silent." MH 47. The lover of fighting, the peaceless one, roared in flaming anger. He bade them fetter the righteous one, so that he might please the Magi, Persia's teachers, the servants of the fire. MP 16. But my lord answered the king, "What you will, that do to me, for I will speak the truth before you. King Shapur protected me, wrote letters about me to all persons of rank to this effect: protect him and support him, so that no one should offend and sin against him. But the proof that King Shapur gave me good support already lies before you, and the letters which he wrote for me to the nobles in every land that they should protect me. And also when King Hormizd came after King Shapur, then with him also I was in favor. It is you who will dishonor your own self. You have seen how Hormizd is greatly honored." MH 48. When the king saw that he persuaded him by every argument and each defense, and that there was no case at all against him, then he passionately sentenced my lord to killing after he had undergone scourging. MH 48. This is how judgment was given on the victor, the messenger, the paraclete. MP 19. Lo, these are the deeds that are full of outrage of bitter-hearted men. This is the road they have made which will lead them to hell. I have not seen a beast raging like these, nor have I seen fire so fiercely consuming chaff, yet was there no merciful man standing up to snatch from them this sinless righteous one. MP 15. He shook the shadow maker in the midst of heaven as his witness. He said, "Behold, O son, you are witness how in his shamelessness the king sins against me." MH 48. Thereon the king ordered, and he chained my lord. He put 3 chains on his back, locked heavy iron fetters on his feet. A chain was fastened on his neck. A few young varlets slapped him. They danced before him in insulting him. MH 48. They shut him up in their prisons and loaded his limbs with iron. They took counsel against him in his evil counsels, that they might daily cast a slur on him. MP 23-24. The tyrant shut him in. At that time the whole world became dark. MH 91. Mani in captivity. On the Tuesday they went and cast him into prison. He confirmed his church until Saturday. Afterwards he was handed over to all his haters. On the Saturday they sealed his fetters and brought him into the prison. They chained him on the 8th Emshir, i.e. January through February. Until the day when he went on high there were 26 days while he was chained with the iron fetters. MH 60. The Lord Cyrus now speaks. How many days of fear, my father, didst thou endure, until thou hadst cut and severed the race of frightful men? 26 days in all, and the nights of them thou didst spend in chains in Belapat. O renown of the eons of light, O noble holy image of God's mysteries, O hands that gave freedom to a multitude of souls that are bound, today in bonds of iron, MP 15. Bahram did not believe in thy preaching, he listened to thine enemies, the deniers of thy hope, MP 48. From the time thou didst refute their error, they loaded thee with iron and bound thee. They loaded thy hands and feet, and put neck chains also on thy body. They threw thee into their prisons, thinking they could hold thee in. 26 days and the nights of them thou didst spend in irons. MP 43. Mani himself tells us, they loaded me with irons as is done to sinners. They fettered me like thieves. They judged me like criminals. They all insulted me like sorcerers. From the day they bound me to the day of the cross, there were counted in all some 26 days, while they kept watch on me night and day, setting guards to keep watch on me. They put 6 neck chains, they fettered me with iron bars, while all the elect wept, and the hearers, seeing the sufferings wherein I am. Those sinners, all of them, did not let me see my children and my disciples, my shepherds and my overseers, when they saw them coming to me. In the day they brought me before the judge to torture me with the punishment of a scourge. They were all of them firmly fixed in evil, not one of them aided me. All the lawless ones judged me, the impious, the creatures of sin, held me in their power amid the whole multitude, like a sheep that has no shepherd. They buzzed at me like wasps, they roared at me like lions, saying to me in a loud voice, It does not please us that thou shouldst do these things. Bahram did evil to me in his wrath. He took counsel with his chieftains against me. He swore to me by his father's salvation, saying, I shall not leave thee in the world henceforth. MP 19. 21. The second interview. The king apparently called Mani to him once again, having it seems forgotten he was a prisoner. Thereon, after this, the king remembered that fetters were on his feet, so the officers brought him hither. When he had entered into the king, MH 48, Bahram asked him about some girl who had gone to the king's capital and demanded her return, failing which he said he would put Mani's head on the gate of the city of Belapat. The king said to him, Show me the property which she has taken with her, and tell me in which place she is, where has she gone? MH 49. But Mani was firm and would not betray the whereabouts of this girl, who was probably one of his royal disciples. Then Bahram began to ask him about his doctrines. How many worlds are there, and how long will it be before evil is finally destroyed? Mani answered him briefly, and then the king was silent. MH 49. Evidently Mani next asked leave to talk with his disciples in the prison, and they too, looking lovingly at him, pleaded with the hard-hearted king for this privilege. It was granted, as was usual with those under sentence of death. 22. Mani consoles his disciples. The sadly mutilated story goes on. He went to rest, then he sat on a bed, and on those who belonged to him bestowed advice about each one of his affairs. Next he gave instruction about his children, i.e. disciples, who had faithfully clung to his discipline while they accompanied him, MH 50. He commanded the wise ones, that is, the elect, to preach to the hearers, MP 35, saying to them, Preserve the righteousness before me, because they were grieving at being left as orphans. He said that Sisin would be the leader after him until the day wherein he should raise himself to the garden of the light. Then he encouraged them, saying, Be strong and firm of heart so long as you live in the world, and you shall do good deeds in the church, and worship God through your fasting and the psalms which you sing for the years of earthly life. Sisin himself he bade, Govern the church which I leave behind as the leader after me. Indeed, this arrangement was his response to a prayer from his disciples. Thou didst gather thy children beside thee, thou didst embrace them all as they cried to thee. Do not abandon thy church, which is the world. Do not leave thy beloved, lest she lose the flavor of the salt that thou hast won for her. Thou didst appoint the 12 teachers and the 72 overseers. Thou didst make Sisin leader over thy children. When thou hadst set thine affairs in order, thou didst implore thy father. He answered thee. Then thou didst leave them thy body and ascend to thy kingdom. MP 44. 23. His prayers to God. We have important pieces of the beautiful and instructive prayer he made thus at the hour of death. The Coptic texts read, "Then it was time for him to come out from this world, and the disciples remained with him while he escaped from the body of this deceit. He was sitting up on the bed because he saw in the heavens the sign of the angels who would receive him on high. He asked them to pray for graces for him and for the whole church, while his body was agonizing from stiffness of the joints of this house." MH 51. The Blessed One, our Lord Mani, he bent his knees, imploring mercy, crying out to God, saying, "Open to me the door, and give me release from my sufferings. The rulers of the earth have judged me in their wrath. They believed their lying words through the speeches of the Magi, cruel men who alter and change what is sweet and make it bitter. They were stirred, they trembled, even the powers of the evil one. They turned their sword against the humble man. They were unwilling indeed to see in the streets of their cities. From the day of the great persecution to the day of the cross there are 6 years. I spent them walking in the midst of the world like the captives among strangers." MP 19. "Each one pursued me with eager cruelty like a sheep that is followed everywhere by wolves." He goes on, "Hear, O God, the voice of the afflicted while it weeps in the midst before his Father, that he should help him who is about to die." MH 52. Then he spoke again, calling on the deities, "Draw back the curtain and the veil to admit my petition and my prayer, and to bring the garment of glory and receive me out of this world." MH 52. "Also, in my necessity, I have only to look to you, for I have no power to move or to lift up my head, or to move my hands and my feet because of the iron." MH 96. "I implore you to send the angel who comes to those who are confined in the body and yet stand firm in the faith." MH 52. Mani continued his prayer, "Lo, the sky and the earth and the 2 luminaries, they bear witness of me on high, that while I did good among them, they in their cruelty have crucified me. I was gazing at my twin with my eyes of light, beholding my glorious Father, him who ever waits for me, opening the gate to the height before me. I spread out my hands in prayer to him. I bend my knees also in worship to him, that I may divest myself of the image of flesh and put off the vesture of humanity." MP 19 through 20. "Hear me, O Father, while I roll myself before thy mercy, and before thy lofty bema, i.e. mercy seat. O Judge of all the worlds, hear the prayer of the righteous. Do not be ignorant of the children left behind him. O true Father of the orphans and husband of the mourning widow. O first of the righteousness, hear the voice of the afflicted. O my Father, my Savior, O perfect man, Virgin of the light, draw my soul to yourselves out of this abyss. Shame the hater through your mighty aid. You have sent me to this place to preach the message of the mind of the greatness, i.e. God. O being of the light, thou hast sent and commissioned me, speedily hear my petition. Save the captive out of the hands of those who have robbed him. Loose the fettered one from the iron. Draw up my spirit out of the statue, i.e. body. My soul out of a filthy place. It has perished in the midst of this world among the pains that I have endured therein for the sake of thy name, since my youth. MH 53. Let thy great power come speedily to rescue me. Send thy mighty angel to save me from the hands of malice, and that I may throw off my fetters on the earth and surrender the house, i.e. body, to its Lord, i.e. evil matter, and he will shed blood and watch over his body. Clothe me in the robe of glory that I find in thee. It is thou who hast chosen these, my children. They came on the earth with thy command to oppose the sects. For who asked thee, whom dost thou answer when they question thee? To whom givest thou ear when he complains and calls to thee in misery? Thou hast heard the men of light orphaned before thee. MH 53. I have clung to thy hope and preached to mankind, and renounced the delights of the world from my birth until my old age. I found myself rejoicing when I dared to name myself with thy great name, saying, Thy servant am I, the messenger in the world. I see the image of thy glory. I depend upon thy help. It is thou to whom I call in my great need. Do not shame me. Answer me, O my Savior. Rescue my soul out of the afflictions. MH 53 through 54. His voice was heard before the King of Love, who had sent him. The power came. A messenger came from paradise. Mani, the ruler, wishes to depart. And then was the reward given to the messenger of the light, the great apostle of this generation, when he was to leave the world, the great messenger of the land of the great Babylon. MH 54. 24. Mani dies in prison. Monday, the 26th of February, AD 277. The signs were shown to him that it was time to leave the world. His body began to dissolve, his chains shook themselves and resounded. Then his beauty began to change. His image appeared before his eyes, fashioned from his face and his material substance. His limbs began to quiver, the lips fell apart, his body became like a house that totters. He began to crumple up in pain, while he groaned because of the urgency of his prayers, spreading out his hands to heaven while his arms called upon God, and tears poured from his eyes to dry on the tortured cheeks. MH 54. Evidently some of the disciples now came to him secretly to remove the chains. They heard a voice coming from the body as the noble soul tried to free itself. When he was about to raise himself out of the body of flesh, the righteous one lifting himself to the heaven of the great kindly one, soaring away, the messenger of the light returning home, the light pearl who shall be brought out of the restless seas of the world. They saw his worth and his beauty. They heard the voice of the honored one, the messenger of the light, while he freed his glorious soul, withdrawing from the body, and joining the lofty column of praise to ascend into the glorious land of light. MH 55. The body of the messenger was reverently lifted as if he would lay it in the tomb, the body of Mani, the apostle, surrounded by his host and his angels. When their Lord and Master was about to go from the world, the disciples of Mani, the apostle, were called the fatherless, the orphans. He took the time, he prayed, his prayer was granted. He left his children behind him. He left us knowingly. The angel came. He smoothed for him his path on high. Oh, blessed are we, for we have not sinned against him. And he has made us into a garland and set it on his head. He prayed piteously while his body was in the iron fetter. The tears flowed out from his eyes, his hands became loose, his eyes trembled from the weight of the iron chain. His voice became feeble while he prayed and implored God, his Father in heaven, to listen to the voice of the righteous one, and to receive his soul in peace as he came forth from the world. He implored grace from God while things around him became as they usually are when a man is dying in the world. MH 56. There came those that should draw near before his soul. The angels came with the trophy in their hand. Also the terrible form of the demons appeared to him. She, i.e. his soul, has strength in remembering the labors of the messenger, traveling everywhere in doing good to the universe. It was the angels who prevailed, and they led him into the way of peace. Thereon he rested himself in peace because he had completed his work. MH 57. And in great joy, together with gods of light, who advance on his right and left at the sound of harps and joyous song, he flew in divine power. They received him in joy and led him into the divine hall. When he had seated himself on the couch, something took his vision and it changed. It began to fade out. His children uttered his name, calling out to their father. Thereon he asked for bread and salt. It was brought to him. He prayed over it. The same was done in the midst of his children. He kissed the body. He spoke to them very sweetly, saying, Greetings from me to the elect and the hearers, my children. They came closer to him. He laid his hand upon the head of Sisin, saying, Use the place that I have given you for the help and strengthening of your brethren after me. MH 57 through 58. Thereupon he stretched himself out like a man sleeping on his couch. They kissed him lovingly when they saw that he was about to come forth. They called aloud on his name with tears, weeping before him and saying, O Father, it is thou who art going from us, leaving behind thee thy children to be orphans after thee. MH 53. So Mani died. Thus was on the 26th of February, AD 277, a Monday. The story of his death is told also by Amu and Ozios, two of the apostles, in Mir Mani 3, page 17. The Faithful Women. From that day on until the evening, his body was lying there while his soul soared on high, his eyes being calm and peaceful. Then went to him 3 women hearers of the faith, Banach, Dinach, and En. They sat down before him and bewailed him, and they laid their hands on his eyes. They closed them, lest they should overflow. For so it is the custom to do when someone's soul has gone up hence, leaving the body. They kissed his mouth in loving devotion, while they mourned him, saying, O our Father, open thine eyes and look at us. Stretch out thy right hand to thy beloved, i.e. the Church, who is full of gentleness and pity towards thee. Where are the thousands whom thou hast chosen out, and the 10,000s who have trusted in thee? For on account of the truth and the integrity which thou hast given to the earth, all lands must mourn for thee within thy church, and publicly weep in thy congregations. For there are thousands to whom thou hast borne witness. While their hands lay on his eyes, they spoke this, weeping. But he did not answer. He lay there in silence. His speech had ceased. His mouth was still. He was at rest. O you children of righteousness, praise those women, thank them, and honor them in your hearts, that they have closed our father's eyes after he had died among the haters of the light. MH 59. And then they departed out of the fear of the king, that he would punish them with cruel tortures when the men had come forth. The embodied one withdrew from the holy body of our Lord, leaving it with the angel, and he led his soul on high, where his merit was estimated. A voice resounded out of heaven, Let him be henceforth without illness, without pain, having ceased to suffer in the prison of the body. He came forth and raised himself on high, together with the power that had come in order to fetch him. MH 59 through 60. On the 2nd day of the week he suffered. On the 4th day of the month, Faminoth, at the 11th hour of the day, he gave himself up to death. MP 18. At 11 hours of the day, i.e. about 5 p.m., he ascended hence out of the body to the dwellings of his greatness in the height. He attained his form of the divine and perfect image of the light. MH 60. 26. Mani enters heaven. The story goes on. He came forth and leapt on high with the power that was come for him. See, this is how they move as the divine image is a procession appears out of the temple, radiant as a shining lamp. He was raised up out of the darkness of this world into the house. He lifted himself out of the world into the heaven of the treasure, out of the realm of evil into the kingdom of the great holy righteous one, leaving behind all sorrows, namely the world, and all sects of error, the haters and the scoundrels. MH 60. The righteous one, who gives peace out of strife, came forth between him and the demons, and bade his angel come down with the messenger of the light, in order to ascend on high in triumph. His descent was out of his race. He did his work as a good interpreter. It is enduring. He leapt out of his body, not caring for its fate, or how the king would bring down rain on it. All his care was for the soul. The wicked voice was silenced by the music of the preaching. He raised himself out of the world and its deceits. He is the great Savior, the teacher of the elect. The great believer went to rest and ascended, becoming the good father of the orphans. He raised himself the husband of the widows, the teacher of the scriptures, the singer of the psalmist's psalms. The Lord left his servants, the merchant his wares, the master his pupils, the good planter his crops. MH 60 through 01. The preacher of life, the interpreter of the land of great Babylon, departed like an arrow shot from a bow through this world, like a hero spurning the delights of the great habitable globe of men, despising the thirst of this world, and shining above it like the eye of the moon in its glory, crowned like Sethel with brightness, leaving his children down in the world to mourn for him. So he ascended and went to the rest, and the gods and the angels praised him. The exalted captive, who was chosen them out of the world, now withdraws himself with the glorious angel into that kingdom of light, the realm of those who had gone to fetch him. He who sees his departure and the glory while he goes up on high, and does not believe that it is his way whereon he too must go, he is a wanderer astray, for he has not let himself be convinced by the example of the Blessed One, the messenger of the light. MH 61 through 62. 27. Public horror at the tragedy. The homilist proceeds, "As for that holy thing, the body, it was left lying on the bier, still held in the iron chains. Then the rumor about him was spread in the whole town. They heard in all the city of Belapat that he had ascended on high. Many men gathered together in groups and came. Thereon, as the king was busy worshipping, they drew him out and brought him away from the prison. They gathered round him weeping, while some of the hearers of the faith stood firm secretly in the midst of the heathen, watching them while they called to him, the messenger of the light Mani, the doer of good, saying, Alas, and ruin comes to us. What a misfortune it is that is prepared for our city, that this good man should die in it, through the wickedness of his haters. He has sinned against nobody. He has not robbed any of their property. MH 62. It seems that someone carried to the king a report of Mani's death and the public distress on account thereof, for he ordered that the body be taken and laid on a sheet in the middle of the public street. This was the third Sunday, we are told, after he had fallen into the hand of his enemies. His fetter was removed, and the body was laid out in the presence of all the people amid their tears and expressions of grief. 28. The king outrages the body. Here a gap of 3 pages follows in our main text, but the story can be recovered from fragments of other sources. It is clear that the king doubted that Mani was really dead, and feared to leave the body for the people to venerate. In the madness of his wrath he wished by means of many outrages to destroy the beauty of thy limbs, cries the mourning psalmist. Thou didst ascend in the column of glory on high, without any hindrance, but thou didst cast down the dead body before the face of thine enemies. MP 15. The lawless men were confounded. They brought their wrath upon the body. The murderous demon was enraged. He gave out his word, saying, Perhaps it is a drug of which thou hast made use. He commanded the physicians and the magi to examine the body. Thy holy body, against which he mocked and plotted, he kindled fire in a great furnace. MP 15. He stripped off Mani's skin, filled it with grass, dipped in certain medicaments, and inflated his flesh. Also he commanded to be given as a prey to the birds. Lo, when his body was brought forth in the city of those sinners, when they had out off his head and hung it up amid the whole multitude. MP 19 through 20. They shed thy body in the middle of the street of their city. They struck off thy head and set it on high upon their gate. They rejoiced in thy murder, not knowing that there is a judgment. For account shall be demanded of thy death, and thy blood shall be avenged. Their godless city shall receive the reward for the outrage it committed. MP 44. He was put to shame. The lawless judge brought down his wrath upon his body. They hung his head upon the gate, not knowing what they were doing. The wise ones also, who are among men, i.e. the elect, bore witness of his eminence. MP 24. His skin they hung at the gate of Jundishapur, which is still known as the Mani gate, saying, This man has come forward, calling people to destroy the world. It will be necessary to begin by destroying him before anything of his plans be realized. So they hung his skin on the buildings of the city gates. He spilled his blood to no purpose. His murder even became a sign for all the men who pity him. MP 15. Blessed are thy loved ones who shed their tears for thee, O Mani. Lo, the grief of thy body, the joy of thine ascended spirit. MP 44. Woe to them, the children of the fire, i.e. the Mazdians, because they sinned against thy holy body. I mean the Magi who looked upon thy blood. They loved the evil genius of the Jews, God's murderers. MP 43. They seized him and crucified him. They scattered his congregations. Thereon after they had crucified our Father, they completed the mystery of his apostolate. MH 74 through 75. It is clear that Mani's death was the signal for a brutal persecution of his followers over wide areas of the empire, a persecution to be renewed from time to time until the Muslims overthrew the blood-stained dynasty. Then the religion which had stained itself with the blood of God's holy and gentle prophet had to flee, shattered from Persian soil, to the refuge of India's all-embracing tolerance. Mani, the man and his work. One who has read the foregoing pages on the life and death of Mani, fragmentary as the malice of men and the undiscriminating ravages of time have made it, one who reads the cries of passionate and adoring love which this messenger awoke in the hearts of those who knew him best, and which are so inadequately represented in our GPM 35 through 39, 88, and 91 through 92, will at once dismiss the cruel and lying slanders put out against him by polemicists in the Christian and Parsi camps. The absurd fabricated life of Mani copied by so many out of Hegemonius's libellous pages, though it may conceivably be taken as a myth with deeper meaning, are so far from the truth found in these all but contemporary accounts that it were dishonest to defile our pages by further reference to them. In Mani, then, we see a true religious reformer, sincerely certain of the divine source of his mission, and inspired by a great ideal, as Jackson puts it in his Zoroastrian Studies, page 188, to bring the world, Orient and Occident, into closer union through a combined faith based on the creeds known in his day. Was that aim so utopian then an empty dream? The same great scholar writes, Persia of the 3rd century A.D. was capable more than any other country of producing a world religion, arising from an aggregate of the great religious systems of the world. To that mission Mani gave the whole of his mighty energy, the whole of his immense grasp of the tangled religious materials of the age, the whole of his boundless imagination and artist's skill in wielding such fantasies into a single coherent plan, the whole of his rich philanthropy, which in its turn won the devotion of men and women who for 11 centuries were proud and happy to embrace exile and death for his name. His extraordinary labors, wandering over vast areas of little-known lands, planting churches and teaching them by letters and books, and guiding them in a strong but simple organization, show him to have been one of the very greatest men of the first millennium A.D. That he was fully aware of the ways in which his work surpassed even that of his great predecessors is shown by several passages in the Kephaliah. His very human pride in these achievements and in his 5 great and other minor books, which should forever have kept intact the doctrine and life he had given, only draws him nearer to our human sympathies. The kindliness wherewith he defended the ugly saint, his humor with the Nestorian and his own disciple Aredes, the ready wit with which he found texts for his sermons in the events of daily life, the personal affection in which he loved to call his followers my children, my brothers, my limbs, and my beloved, the staunch courage shown to the persecuting king, the poetic talent so manifest in every fragment of his own writing and in the books of his followers, the skill in painting which made his very name a new word for a painter in Persian, the love for music and fragrance so manifest in the teaching and practice of his church, all mark him out as a real saint to whom history has as yet failed to pay even a tithe of the due attention. But amid these various qualities of greatness still shines out the brilliance of that one by which Mani himself chiefly willed to be known, the messenger of the light. Never for a moment does he himself claim to be divine. That doubtful and dangerous honor was very naturally, in his oriental environment, put on him by those who loved and revered him with such passionate devotion as their luminary, their life, their father, and their God. This last word should not shock the Western reader of today as it shocked the Westerner of earlier centuries. It conveys no hint of blasphemy at all. When the Indian calls his guru God, he does not for a moment confuse him with the one absolute beyond all forms and essences. He declares his voice the voice of God, just as the devout Catholic monk regards the rule of his order and his superior as God's will. Mani's own frank admission of his humanity survived long enough even to be found in a Turfan fragment, manuscript 49, referring to the twin or inspiring angel sent to him by God. And even now he himself accompanies me, he himself holds and protects me, and in his power do I fight with the demons of greed and Satan, lust, and teach men wisdom and knowledge, and save them from greed and Satan. This being he sometimes calls the Christ, sometimes the Comforter or Paraclete. It is only in so far as Mani becomes truly his mouthpiece that he himself becomes an alter Christus, the promised paraclete. St. Augustine and the rest were too much blinded by their own bigotry and resentment against a creed to which he had become apostate in an age of persecution, to view Mani's real claims with honesty or truth. In refuting Faustus, the great Catholic doctor, besides an undergraduate ribaldry before the deeply mystical and therefore very vulnerable doctrines arising from the truth of God's omnipresence, relied mainly on the futile illogicality of the position, "I don't believe your claims because you are a heretic and a false apostle." The lawyer with a poor case abuses his opponent. Mani's own statements show clearly to the student and lover of truth, unclouded by passion or fanaticism, that he was a real prophet of God, sent by him to do a certain work in the world, and loyally devoted to that work until death took him home to God's bright garden in the paradise of the light. It was this certain faith which gave him strength and courage, won for him the deep love of those admitted to his intimacy, and enabled him to plant a world religion which survived the most brutal persecutions in all the religious history of our still largely barbarous humanity. Nor was Mani's a mere sect, a heretical offshoot from a pre-existent religion. Jackson rightly says, page 20, "It was a veritable religion and exercised an influence for more than 1,000 years upon the lives of countless numbers of devoted followers, inspired by the ideals and high principles of its founder, whom they accounted divine, and the example of whose martyred death they were led to emulate both at the time and in later ages." George Finlay, the historian, writes in Greece Under the Romans, dense edition, page 353, "The great success of Mani in propagating a new religion, for Manichaeism cannot properly be called a heresy, is a strong testimony of this feeling. The fate, too, of the Manichaeans would probably have foreshadowed that of the Mohammedans, had the religion of Mahomet not presented to foreign nations a national cause as well as a universal creed. Had Muhammad himself met with the fate of Mani, it is not probable that his religion would have been more successful than that of his predecessor. While not identifying oneself with the unfriendly attitude here shown towards Islam, which is not in that sense the religion of Mahomet, we may also note that Islam arose in the religious vacuum of Arabia and in a world weary of sectarian squabbles among the Christians, while in Mani's day Christianity was still kept pure by the fires of pagan persecution, and further east Mani had also to contend with an intensely jealous and a powerfully established state creed, linked with a young and vigorous dynasty, and with the proud tradition of a former world supremacy. In a striking article in JAOS 1938, page 240, Jackson writes, "Mani had the exalted fervor of a religious leader and founder of a faith that was once a rival of Christianity and Zoroastrianism, opposition from which latter led him to suffer a martyr's death as an adjudged heretic. Throughout, in his makeup, especially if born with a physical weakness, we can see a peculiar idealism and refinement, combined with rare vision. It has always been recognized that he had a poetic imagination, as shown in his cosmogonic fantasies, and also in a few hymnic stanzas that have been preserved. Tradition assigns to him exquisite skill as an artist, so that his name became in Persia a synonym for painter. His master hand as an adapter of a revised alphabet and a presumed pioneer in calligraphy, the latter art being especially cultivated by his followers. All bespeak a highly ideal and creative mind. He cared particularly for music and allowed to his followers the enjoyment of perfumes as something refined." Jackson speaks also of his sensitive and spiritual nature, which was above all religiously so creative. Even at the risk of repetition, I feel these testimonies from one of our day's greatest ironists are worth recording here. Mani's personal reverence and love for his acknowledged predecessors, Zarathustra, the Buddha, and still more for Jesus, whom he often called the Son of God, betoken the width of his own religious view. It became natural for his church to adapt itself to the special background of each environment it entered, and this may well have led others to view it as a heresy, clandestinely undermining the faith of the Orthodox. Now, as Harnack says in his Encyclopaedia Britannica article, Volume 14, page 803, such great adaptability is just as necessary for a universal religion as a divine founder in whom the highest revelation of God may be seen and reverenced. Unhappily, though the Manichaean books are full of echoes and memories from the great Hebrew prophets and psalmists, a perhaps Arian anti-Jewish hatred led his followers with their Marcionite forerunners to a bitter scorn and rejection of the Old Testament as inspired by the forces of evil. This enabled their Catholic opponents, habituated to rely so largely on supposed prophecies in building up their theology, to arouse mass hatred against them among the ignorant. There is no doubt that Mani himself laid great stress upon his cosmogonic fantasies, which were probably essential to winning the faith of Mesopotamian converts in his day, but they were certainly a grave handicap in competing with the comparatively simple cosmology of Catholic Christians, and perhaps understandably awoke the ridicule of their polemic writers. The doctrine of an absolute dualism might satisfy the superficial inquirer brought up in a Mazdian environment, but it cannot long content the truly philosophic mind. In trying to maintain it in the West, and at the same time to uphold the doctrine of Christ's universal immanence, the Manichaeans became involved in absurdities which St. Augustine especially delighted in mercilessly exposing. But we may well doubt whether it was such subtle illogic which led to the final ruin of Mani's church, so much as the pitiless violence and the vandal burning of its precious books, which it had everywhere and always to endure. Spread as it did from Spain to Siam, and surviving in dangerous form from the 3rd to the 17th centuries here and there, it really became one of the great religions, as Harnack rightly says in his scholarly article already cited. For sensual cults it gave a spiritual, devotional, and aesthetic worship with a strict morality and a simple if firm social organization, nor was that morality too strict. The extremer forms of its celibacy and non-violence were imposed only on the elect, whose number was always very small, and they were voluntarily embraced by them. The lay masses were allowed a normal human life, as they are today among Catholics when compared with that expected of a Trappist or Carmelite, and even so late as in its diluted form among the Cathari of Provence, none could ever impugn the saintly and noble lives lived by most of their elect. Persecution, however, drove the Manichaeans underground, and the need to hide their heresy from the bigots around them must often have led to compromise and corruption of the faith. In self-defense, they became, as Affligé says, a perfectly efficient and capable secret society, and this intensified the suspicion, slander, and suffering of all kinds to which they were always liable. The vilest calumnies pursued them through the centuries, and there are those even today who ignorantly use Manichaean as a term of abuse to suggest incredible blasphemy and an enormity of hypocritical vice. Yet, as Legay says in the same article, JRAS 1913, page 93, a faith that held its own in the face of the hottest persecution for 9 centuries is a rare enough phenomenon, and one which cannot be safely neglected by the student of comparative religion. In fact, Manichaeism is every whit as important a world religion as Islam, Buddhism, or Christianity, and perhaps far more than Jainism, Sikhism, and others usually allowed that title. Let us pay it what it is due, at least now after so many centuries of neglect. 4. Sisin and Inai, first Manichaean popes. Mani entrusted his church to the hierarchy of apostles and elders, at the head of whom stood, after a brief interregnum, Sisin in his own place as leader. An-Nadim, page 334, reports the Manichaeans of his own day as saying, "When Mani was taken up to the gardens of the light, Sisin rose after him as the imam before his taking up, and until he too was received, i.e. died, God's religion and his revelation were standing firm. But for 4 years he could not exercise his authority, because no organization could function during such a storm of persecution." Fleugel, Mani, page 331, quotes a story which coheres well to the picture of the Persian king we have already seen. Bahram I buried 200 Manichaeans with their heads downward in pits and their feet tied to stakes. "See," said he with ferocious irony, The garden that Bahram the king has planted, many of the faithful died as martyrs, many fled to Khorasan, and there strengthened the faith. Many crossed the Oxus River and wandered as far as Turkestan. An-Nadim, page 337, tells us, when Khosru, i.e. the king, had killed and crucified Mani and forbidden the people of his kingdom to join together in the religion, he turned to killing Mani's followers wheresoever he found them. They did not cease to flee from him till they crossed the river of Balkh and entered the Khan's realm, i.e. Turkestan. Others fled westward to Syria or Egypt, and Patik is said by Philaster of Brescia to have preached against the Old Testament in Rome itself by AD 280. The faith was clearly already firmly established on the soil of Egypt, fertilized by centuries of Hermetic and Gnostic teaching. It had probably spread also to Africa, i.e. Tunisia. Sissin, AD 281 to 291. We draw most of his story from the Book of the Crucifixion in M.H., which tells of his master's sufferings too. After the year of massacre, we learned, there came 3 further years of peace without anyone sinning against his people or being a cause of trembling. Their anger was pacified just as he, i.e. Mani, had said while he was still in the body. Then, but a few years after my Lord's crucifixion, the dragon began to creep. His anger gathered on every side from below. Little by little, hatred began to break out again into violence in every land, while the king heated up his anger until 15 years of his reign, i.e. AD 291. It was during these years of uneasy quiet that the faith spread rapidly east and west. In 282, Bahram II lost the twin cities of Ctesiphon and Seleucia to the Roman Aurelius Carus, and it was about that time that Amu, author of the beautiful account of the light world used in GPM 80, traveled in Central Asia, while Adai, Adamantus, prepared in Africa his epitome of the scriptures, drawing in turn from the treasure the Shapurakan, the mysteries, the precepts, and the 2 roots, which we may still have with us in its Chinese dress as CMT. By about AD 287, Julian, proconsul of Africa, reported to Diocletian in alarm at the danger to Roman society implicit in the spread of this new Eastern religion, with its strange views on sex, war, agriculture, and civic duties. Diocletian thought its propaganda was a sort of 5th column from Persia to soften up her great rival in the West. By 290, Manichaeism was prominent in the fertile Fayum district of Egypt, and the Psalms of Tom appeared in their original Syriac form, to be very soon translated into Coptic. Next, year 291, the gathering storm broke in Persia. Then came the wicked and the evildoers and pursued after him, i.e. Sissin, for the Satan cherished envy inwardly and outwardly against his devotees. The kings of the land fell into anger, and their hatred became the raging fire. The wolves suddenly fell upon the flock of sheep to kill and to destroy. Wild beasts burst in among the rams in order to ravage the sheepfolds. Evil ones entered by force into the master's vineyard and cut off the branches with their fruits. Robbers broke into the treasure chamber and looted and destroyed the treasures. The beast broke into the flower garden and trampled it down while it was growing up. The kite burst into the dovecotes and scattered the timid birds. MH 76. In every land spread the reporting of the crucifying of the chief leaders of the church in Persia, out of Mysan and Ctesiphon, in every town in the land of Susiana and Babylon. How many are the myriad victims, and the maidens and celibates yearly fell away from them, i.e. deceased. They captured and slew the teachers and overseers like sheep. They caught the overseers and looted his treasures, i.e. Mani's books. They carried off the elect and the hearers. They slaughtered them like lambs. MH 76. They appeared in their midst like small children before their teachers. They were thrown before lions, but the lions spared them their lives. A few they equipped with weapons and forced to fight with bears, MH 77. We are told that some were compelled to kill ants and thus violate their master's doctrine of nonviolence. They sent horses to fight against them. They paid heed to every prisoner. He was caught and mangled cruelly with their teeth. They did not spare them, they killed them. A few of these they did not destroy, so arrows were thrust in their sight, in order to see that they were really killed. Like papers which have been torn to shreds, they too were torn to pieces, the king watching them while they lay. Then in their wickedness they urged and asked them about everything, MH 77. They crucified the youngsters, children, both maidens and eunuchs. A few they sewed up in the skins, slaying them, boasting that they would destroy the church. How numerous are the hateful deeds they did, telling them that they were lying. They lowed piteously like a herd of oxen dragging off in chains yearly by butchers, like a head of cattle that has no master, allotted to hundreds, to fifties. They were slaughtered in land after land. Their children were murdered before their eyes, MH 77. Some of them were brutally scourged. They crept upon a few of them to inflict tortures on them. On some of them again iron fetters were fastened, and they were thrown into prisons in hunger and thirst, fasting there in misery, cold, and affliction. They were held up with their feet on the earth, pressing thorns and thistles and brambles, while they were hidden without sunlight by the wickedness of evil men. They were envious against the righteous. They demolished their guardhouses, cut off the fruit-bearing trees, broke down the walls on all sides. They went inside their doors. They opened his gates. Even he who had no youngsters, they too were violently beaten. His houses were torn down, the property scattered. Holes were made in the ship in order to bring it to ruin, so that it might be sunk in the deep of the ocean, in order to cause the merchandise to be lost, MH 78. In this crisis, representatives of the churches went to beg Sisson for help in their agony, and he turned to vigil and to prayer. "Look after my children," he cried. "Send to me thy power to aid me in their peril. The children of thy church perish because they stand fast in thy name. Thy glory is in them, ever since the day when thou hast chosen me and put a great crown into my hand, that I might oppose the false sects and all the societies resistant to thy light. I have not lied about thy message. I have not falsified thy oath. I have protected thy children whom thou hast given me. Now behold our desolation, and look upon my tears of sorrow. Thus have I strengthened myself while I was in the hour of misery. It is thine hour. Do not make me despair and fall into the trap. Fill up my heart with the Holy Spirit. Hear the voice of this widow who cries in the judge, for I have been judged in that my children have been killed in every land. Of old we are loaded with good things, and my kindness surrounded, and thy kindnesses surrounded us. Now the sea has fallen into a tumult everywhere, wave dashing against wave, MH 78 through 79. I am thy garden, thy gardeners are in me. I am thy field, I am thy corn. Thy countrymen are like a slave, while thy children are in danger with me. Look after me and have pity on mine. Send to me thy power, for I see the grief of my children. The deniers kill them. They slay my little ones. They burn up my households with fire. I see my children overthrown in the streets, while the bodies of the elect lie there unburied in every land. With the head of the foreigners and the remains of the flesh of the mourners and the widows and the kinsfolk, the miserable ones, who have been torn to pieces by the evil dragons. Their bodies have been rent asunder. Their blood freely flowed upon the earth in every town. They scoff at me, their kinsmen, as the dupe of our God. Thy God is the light, this doctrine is his. Thou, why are thy children driven forth? Wherefore then are they massacred? MH 79 through 80. I turn to thee, crying for thy aid. The kings have pursued me day and night. The rulers have not let me lack a going forth. They have scattered the congregations. They have barred the doors of the temples against the faithful. They have driven me out of my dwellings, settling down in my place. They have shown the darkness of misery, taken away my beauty, silenced the voice of my song. They have carried me into some dungeons, away from the sunlight, hidden me away with stealthy cunning. They have slain the prudent, killed the guileless, massacred my children, tortured my priests and devotees. They have persecuted those who stay resisting in the churches, depending on my wisdom and obedient to my discipline. Give heed to see how much they injure us, O my Father. Pitifully send thy power to support the courage of those who are to be crucified till they come to the places of rest. Take to thee the souls of the hearers who are to be destroyed by the haters. MH 80 through 81. Though it is not quite certain whether this prayer is directed to God himself or to Mani the prophet, it seems clear from its terms that the fragment S8 refers to the same general persecution. For this cause are teachers of the light killed, and for this cause the priests are mourning. He himself keeps all the kingdoms divided, and himself indeed shines over the kingdom like or through the sun and moon. There is no need to transfer it to the persecution under Anushirwan in AD 528, as Jackson is inclined to do. MH continues its story. This took place in the years of King Bahram, the son of Bahram I. Now it was he and the whole company of the Magi, and the denier and hater of the giver of good things and of peace, who had worked the crucifixion of our Lord, when then, after these great afflictions and perils had increased in this way, outwardly indeed Sissin was silent, but inwardly he consoled the man of light, and his prayers aroused his righteousness. They threatened against him who had uttered that prayer, that they were about to crucify him. MH 81. The world was filled with his glory. It reached the ears of the king of the land, who had come to that time in anger. They came to plot against the righteousness. They went their way to meet with the deniers who had risen up again. They wrote lying pamphlets filled with wickedness, and showed them to the king. They left them in the keeping of the Magi, who were eager to deny his hope. So they assembled, all of them, the king and the nobles. We came with the other disciples, talking to one another. Wickedness drew near, until at last a great disaster happened. The deniers showed their anger. They expressed a desire to condemn his devotees before the king's presence, namely the men of light, the glory of the righteousness being behind them. They proclaimed the doctrine. MH 81 through 82. They brought him, i.e. Sissin, before the king. He questioned him about all the doctrines, asked him about every separate detail. My lord Sissin replied exhaustively. He persuaded him to join him in his place, but the king harassed him with incitements to lust, saying to him, "Here is a girl." He forced him, "Have connections with her, obey me, fear me. Now if you obey me, I shall honor you. You are a handsome man, why ruin yourself? Wherefore will you kill yourself? It is you who would ruin yourself, for I do not destroy you. Look after yourself. I am ready to kill you." MH 82. It was only natural for the king, who had overwhelmed the faithful in a reign of terror, to hope now finally to destroy the faith by thus corrupting its leader with a public apostasy from the messenger's essential laws. But Sissin was made of the stern stuff of the martyrs of chastity, like Thecla and Saint Maria Goretti. He was ready, nay eager, to give his life as an offering of gratitude to his deified and beloved master. The story goes on. Then he calmly spoke to the king. "Your words and deeds have well agreed." He spoke plainly, his heart was strong, he did not hesitate at all before him. Then the king brought swords. He set them in a row before my lord. The king said to him, "Look and see these sharp swords. Now fear and accept my word." But my lord Sissin said, "I have one who is more to be feared than you, to whom I look up. I stand in awe of him who can altogether overthrow your word." Then the king was angry and said, "Who is that before whom you fear more than before me?" Sissin said, "It is before God my heart fears greatly." Then the king once, twice, thrice commanded, but was unable to persuade him. He then picked up a sword and said to him, "I shall kill you now with this sword." MH 82. Sissin welcomed the cross like his father, the messenger of the light, at the king's hands. He did not lose courage before death at any time. The crowd of the others were watching him. He was not afraid, but he turned to the other devotees and encouraged them to enter on the rest above. Then he laid down the lordship which he held. He loosened his shoes, took off his riband of his own hair. He rejoiced at his destiny. MH 82-83. The king raised his hand and smote him with the sword on his neck. His blood flowed out like a fountain. They took 3 elders from among us, Apket and Abesira, the brothers of With his crucifixion, the riots in the town took place. They crucified him in public at 9 hours of the day, i.e. 3 p.m. He went up by the column into the land of light. The 10 years that he had been leader, his heart had never wavered. He drank the chalice of his father's crucifixion. He went forth after him. He received the crown. He walked on the ways of his Savior on the roads of peace. He went to rest in the garden, and there he found the recompense for his wrongs and the pains of the world. And the brothers also who were to be crucified with him, MH 83, Enai AD 291 to 303. The story goes on. His word was laid upon Enai that he should himself be the leader of the sect in his place. As Enai was born about the time of Mani's first proclamation, and was now about 50, he was old enough to take the troubled church under his protection. He enjoyed the reputation, like his master, of being skilled in medicine. It is clear from our broken text that soon after his murder of Sisin, the tyrant king became desperately ill, and when death drew near him, some of his courtiers ran to call Enai, a man gentle and kindly in nature. Enai willingly went to treat Bahram in the belief that in this sudden opportunity God was bringing succor to the tortured church. The writer says the king received him with oaths. I shall make my cure a remedy in the heart of you all. I shall work for the favor and good of your religion if you save me. Do not imagine that I have killed your sons so that you should fear me and not heal me. I did not will it, but it was these evil men who accused them, so they suffered. Now express what is in your minds. Do not be afraid. All this is past. From today on you will be safe. So he then healed him by praying to God. He received honor, and gods and angels helped him. He received letters of protection from the king to the nobles in every land. He gave peace to the church before the face of the whole world. The king gave him his hand when they were led to the banquet, and permitted that he should sit beside him as they ate. He gave him gold and silver. He did not accept it, lest it should tempt him to acquire power and wealth, for he wanted only God and his hope. He did acts of respect and homage before the king and the nobles. The courtiers honored him. Evermore did the king prosper in his life. He received victory and grace. As for Enai, peace came on his religion. Glory came down from on high upon the honored and the disdained, the leader and the overseers, the elect and the hearers. On them came grace from God. The righteousness, i.e. the church, throve in all lands. Great glory came to it in the whole world. They built and organized churches in every city out of the places where men live, and worshipped in every place. MH 84. Letters were written to the nobles on every river in the kingdom. They went into the king's palace in peace. Rest came down on the sons of heaven, on the righteousness. They became friends with the king, with the great ones and the rulers who held power before the good. The 3 last years of Bahram this happened. The church was in rest during that time. Peace came to her. She was greatly honored. Thereupon after this he, i.e. Bahram II, came to Belapat and died. He went to rest at that time from the troubles of the world. MH 85. It seems clear from this wording that the story must have been written down very shortly after Bahram died, in AD 294, and before Diocletian persecuted the Manichaeans so brutally 2 years later. There are several hints, as in MH 81, where the first person is used we, that it is the work of an eyewitness, at least in part. This may well have been Kushtai, Mani's secretary, or even Enai himself, who must end his work during his own lifetime. The story closes with recalling a prophecy of Mani that a brief persecution would give way to glorious triumph, and that could hardly have been referred to AD 291 by anyone writing after AD 296, when persecution began again. In AD 295, Alexander of Lycopolis was opposing the work of Papi and Thomas in Egypt, dubbing Manichaeism an arbitrary and irrational doctrine. Several of its books had already appeared in an elegant African Latin, and probably also in Coptic. Next year, Julian's compliance bore fruit. On the 30th of March 296, Diocletian extended the persecution of Christians to Manichaeans, decreeing, "We order that their organizers and leaders be subject to the final penalties and condemned to the fire with their abominable scriptures." We prescribe that their adepts be to the last one beheaded, and decree that the goods of these people be confiscated to the state. If nobles and other officials, even the most highly placed, have joined this sect, you will have their patrimony seized by the state and themselves sent to the mines. Codex Gregorius 1:14, Titus 4:4-7. This edict let persecution loose in Egypt and North Africa. Early martyrs in Egypt included Mary, Theona, Cleopatra, Plusian, Appa, Polydoxus, Eustathius, Gemnute, Psi, Appa, Panai, and Appa Psi. These mingled their blood with such Christian martyrs as Saints Primus, Felician, Agnes, Beatrice, Susanna, Cyriacus, and Sebastian in Rome, Lucia and Vitus in Sicily, Felix at Nola, George, Adrian, and Gorgonius at Nicomedia, Menas in Phrygia, Christina in Tuscany, Erasmus in Antioch, Chrysogonus at Aquileia, Alban in Britain, and Vincent at Saragossa. The Manichaeans encouraged one another in martyrdom by relating the courage of the Christians suffering during 3 centuries, beginning with Christ and Stephen. Though King Narsai, in that blood-stained year, defeated Galerius, Persia again lost Mesopotamia and her western provinces to Rome. During his reign, the Manichaeans had rest in Persia, AD 296-303. One Abdiel commented on the mysteries, and Ianu, perhaps Inai himself, on the treasure of life. The faith grew strong in Lydia and even spread to the Balkans. For about 298, a Manichaean virgin of Lydia, named Bassa, was buried near to Salonika. Someone seems to have carried it to Malabar in India. Here, by AD 300, we are told a village bore the name of Manigrama, i.e. Mani's town. People now think it was a mercantile colony of Persian Christians, I learn.